Road songs. Up and down California's highways, Charlie sang. He sang the fence posts, trees, and mountains, songs made up on the spot, or old songs with new twists. And he seemed to know every gas station attendant, the old man with the bifocals behind the counter at the food post, even the cops. While other people feared and showed hostility towards police, he wasn't in the least defensive. Thus, the cop who rousted us was granted his authority. And rather than trying to bust us, directed us to local sites of interest. Charlie said that despite abuses of power and the ignorance of some, police had valid purpose. He said, I got no argument with that. The part about granting them their authority was interesting, since one must have it to give it. The road helped clear our minds of doldrums, conundrums, and other noisy drums. Charlie was full of characters who took our attention, among them a lounge singer, a cowboy crooner, a Heim Fleischleister, a Nebbish. Mary and I sometimes laughed so hard that our stomachs were vibrated to a lasting calm. Road time also helped us get to know each other. We were talking about artwork when Charlie said that his first grade teacher had criticized his painting. He looked dejected. Mary and I laughed. No, really, he said, half really. She put her nose in the air and said in front of the class, Now, Charlie, everyone knows that turkeys are not purple. He said that was the last time he tried to draw or paint. He joked about his lack of education. One time, a guard had looked at a letter he was writing and read it out loud. Dear Swart, it said, you are my grill. Charmed and armed with this new information, Mary and I could poke him with it. We were getting to know a little boy whose life was hard for us to imagine. In Santa Barbara, we spent days on the beach and nights with Paula, the smart and attractive wife of one of Charlie's old cell partners. She made 3 strangers and a dog feel entirely welcome, even when she was at work. From another friend's house in Los Angeles, I left Mary and Charlie to visit my family, saying I would be back in a few hours. My mother was frightened when she opened the door. I embraced her and she stiffened. Where had I been? Why did I look so different? In what I enthusiastically described as a healthy life of camping and sightseeing, she saw a depression of homelessness and poverty. Sickness and death would follow. No amount of reassurance could dispel these predictions. And I smiled and said, Mom, it's summer. I'm well and I'm happy. But I suddenly felt terrible. Divided, torn, contemptuous, and sorrowful. I loved my mother, but I couldn't stand to be around her. Mary and Charlie found me at my boyfriend's house the following day, I insisted upon going back to my parents' house to pick up a few things. But once there, I got stuck, nervously sorting my belongings. I couldn't stay, but I couldn't go. They waited, but only when they moved to leave did I grab a stack of my old writings and break free. Charlie didn't speak to me on the way to the car. He lay on the back seat and fell asleep while Mary took the wheel. I felt confused and delinquent, but as we got farther away, I felt relief. At dusk, we stopped for fast food. Charlie stirred, his hair mussed, his face puffy like that of a petulant child. He ignored us, getting out of the car with Muffet and going to the takeout window. From there, he carried 4 hamburgers to a picnic table, sat on the table with his boots on the bench, and unwrapped the first hamburger for her, making sure that there were no pickles in it. When Charlie spoke to me again, he said, "You don't seem to understand the meaning of your word. Without word, there's no reality between people." He said, "Old men in prison taught me, word is bond. When you break your word, you break trust. When you break your word to yourself, you lose your soul." Later, he told me, "My mom was a liar, so I learned to dislike lies." On the road one night, Charlie asked me what I was thinking, and my instant reaction was to protect myself from ridicule. I said I wasn't thinking anything. He pressed me, and I refused to remember. Angered, he swerved the car to the roadside, alarming me. He said, "Why would you hide from me?" I shored up defiance. As he turned onto the road again, he asked, "Are your thoughts that terrible?" All I could think was how unterrible, how insignificant they actually were. No longer sounding angry, he asked, "Are you afraid of being foolish?" Maybe I'm foolish. Do I sound foolish to you? I didn't answer him. He said, "What you withhold is from you, not me. I'm on my own trip. What you think is for you." Confronted with my stubborn withdrawals, Charlie sometimes surprised me with U-turn sentences that began in ominous tones, signaling the end of tolerance, a parent's ultimatum, a breakup or divorce, and cruised around a 180 corner toward lightweight suggestions I can only approximate here. If, after all this time, you can't even let go of that, then you can give yourself a break and do what you can. In one arresting sentence, I felt cornered, paralyzed, relieved, and open to a new idea. I was suspicious of psychological machinations, but these switchbacks, rather than being calculated, seemed to come naturally to him. In either case, they freed my mind from one pattern and gave me a choice as to how I wanted to proceed. I'd spent a big chunk of my life afraid to move or speak freely. I didn't want to live like that. By Santa Barbara, the stack of my old poetry became a burden, a constant reminder of old, mostly miserable memories. Unbeknownst to anyone, I dumped it in a trash can, and that night, without warning, Charlie turned from inspecting the content of Paula's refrigerator and delivered Shakespeare's soliloquies with more unaffected eloquence than from any actor I had ever heard. Paula's husband was a talented jazz trumpeter who, in the unconventional style, had crossed a line that sent him to federal prison. Although I never asked, I thought he might have been addicted to heroin. It is unfortunate that all illegal drugs and plants were lumped together in anti-drug propaganda. After marijuana was commonly discovered to be less harmful than alcohol, some people assumed that the negative hype about heroin was equally false. Paula's husband had years to do, maybe even a lifetime of addiction, while she lived alone, worked an office job, and visited him when she could. Mary's parents were coming from Wisconsin, so I left Paula and traveled north to a friend's house in Berkeley to welcome them. When they got to the house, they wouldn't come inside. Charlie and I came out on the porch to be introduced, but after hello, an X of silence fell. So we left them to have words with their daughter. They took Mary away in their car and, on return, stood talking with her beside it. Mary came through the screen door, smiling with a red face and wounded eyes. Her mother had chastised her for giving up a good job, and her dad had called Charlie a mooch. In no time, we were rolling north out of suburban traffic, past the surfers in Bodega Bay, to an unoccupied beach where we could take off our clothes. As Mary ran to the water, Charlie told me to look at how beautiful she was. Intimacy between the three of us had seemed illicit at first, my mind constructing questions as barriers. Yet, I could create nothing that didn't dissolve in reality. Our skin felt natural. Our lips felt natural. And he felt natural between us. He moved us so that we didn't need to think about it. Sensually, rather than with design. And we learned to relax into him. He wondered if Mary and I were sexually attracted to each other. He said that once, while he was making love to a bisexual woman, she had blurted, "Not like that, stupid." He had the forbearance to request her instruction. But Mary and I were not bisexual. We were mutually attracted to him. In Mendocino, we let our cabin go and bartered for a red pod-shaped trailer that we towed to a wide private beach. A contest of ownership had left this beach in legal limbo, incidentally opening it to the few who discovered it. Surrounded by dirt cliffs and a rock peninsula, it was island idyllic. In almost total isolation, we cooked on an open fire, bathed, and washed dishes at the shore. Charlie stayed up late and got up early. I didn't know how he did it. One morning, Mary and I stayed in bed despite his efforts to rouse us. 2 hours later, as we squatted beside the fire, cooking, he was still gone. When he showed, he had traces of rust-colored cliffs on his clothes. He recounted being trapped on a ledge that was easy to reach, but dangerous to leave. For an hour, he had clung to the jagged, unstable face of the cliff while picking a route to safety. "You should have been there," he said enthusiastically. "You missed a good experience." We took walks along the beach. Southern California's beaches were barren by comparison, and the only driftwood I had seen was on a pedestal in an art gallery. I could never have afforded it. Here, driftwood was plentiful and free. I collected one piece after another. One was so big and heavy, I had to stop and rest. Charlie helped me with my precious finds, hoisting the heavy log on his shoulder. As we spotted more and more objects dug, he bent to inspect each piece and ask, "You want to take this too?" My arms were already full of shells, stones, and small sea-whipped branches, each and every one a unique sculpture, displayed across the earth as if tossed by. Suddenly, I snapped to what he was saying. Did I want to take the whole beach elsewhere? Could I personally own it? How blind am I not to see and leave this perfection? And there he was, silently carrying a tree trunk on one shoulder. I looked at him consciously. He understood, bending to lay down the load, and the face of an ancient wise man smiled. When I was small, the beaches in Southern California were a perpetual treasury of starfish, sand dollars, and other beautifully shaped shells. Only a decade later, they were gone. I'm sorry to say we took them. I, my little brother, our parents, and similar bands of thieves. My father, on behalf of his family, carried the bucket containing at least one live starfish from each trip to the beach, as if we had some place to keep them, or would be having them for dinner. In a week, they would die, their fine pastel shells placed upon nails in the garage, or taken to school, then dropped, broken, and thrown away. But I think that the unconscious reason we took them was a longing to be closer to nature. The majority of shells from previous centuries were then scooped up for commercial sale, lest merchants miss out on an opportunity of a lifetime. Infrequently, vacationers found the beach owned by no one. They stayed their distance, but when their vacations were spent, they waved goodbye or dropped off leftovers. Children were sent with butter. Teenagers came with grass. Encircling a night fire, We shared their smoke, and the conversation turned high school. A girl dropped the joint, and one of the guys joked that she was clumsy. Another excused her, saying it was good weed. And a third countered that it wasn't as good as the stuff his brother had. It brought my mind to other nights on other beaches, where kids chugged Coors and then told tales of other drunken times. Charlie struck a guitar chord, and when everyone looked up, he said, "I've got an idea. When I say now, everybody talk about when you were 5 years old." On his word, I began talking, but I could hear a mishmash of peanut butter sandwiches, fire engines, Santa Claus, and Mommy. Everybody cracked up. In psychiatric parody, Charlie crossed his leg and queried, "What does it all mean?" And leaning forward, "Do you really want to carry all that around with you?" Then he made up a clever song, never sung before, about now being endless. That all ever done in now is still being done. And that all nows make up one big now, called forever. When he paused, I heard the ocean, as if for the first time. I felt the air around me and saw, above the mist, an astonishing display of stars and planets. This moment of silence is still in me. With Owsley's latest, we ventured into psychic space. Late in the shadowy trailer by the kerosene lamp, Charlie searched drawers and cupboards for something to quench his thirst. Finding nothing but stale water and a neon envelope of powdered space-age drink. After reading the instructions on the envelope aloud, he explained to it that he didn't want a quart, only a glassful, and then feigned helplessness when the package failed to give clue. Finally producing his own ratio of water and purple powder, he drank with satisfied thirst. But alarm crossed his face. Quickly, he moved the glass down, pretending to pee, raised it to drink, back down to pee, to drink, to pee. His comical expressions had Mary and me rolling in bed. Later, he stood naked at the open doorway, philosophizing while urinating into the darkness. He said many things I don't remember, but holding the sides of the door jamb, moving his pelvis in and out, he explained with glee, "I'm fucking the world." The Professor. By circumventing shoreline rocks, we reached another beach and came upon a safari tent with boisterous noises inside. A statuesque young woman with one curler in her hair and a short stack of dishes was hurrying to the water. She ignored our greeting but called for her husband, who bent as he came out of the tent, huffing because of his balloon shape and size. A serious beard failed to conceal his grin as he extended a hand and invited us inside. But first, he lifted a flap and said firmly, "Come out of here now. Come out of there now. We have guests." There was loud rollicking and a sudden bulge of the tent, before three small boys tumbled outside under his arm and, peeking at us, ran to be near their mother. The man bade us sit around his squat coffee table. Sliding back the lid on a wooden box, he selected one of several dozen finely rolled joints and lit it with a stick match. "My wife rolls them," he said. "I'm sorry, I have no more hash." We settled on cushions and sleeping bags and a few cracker crumbs. "I can't control them," he said, passing us the joint. Re-entering the tent, the woman turned to bark. "Get out of there! Go over there and play now. I mean it," Charlie said. "Just dropped out, huh?" The man chuckled, coughing out smoke. "Couple months ago, can you tell?" He was a college professor on sabbatical, and she looked like a fashion model. After a second joint had gone around, Charlie asked him, "What do you know?" The professor hesitated. Charlie clarified, "What do you know for sure?" The professor thought a moment and answered, "Well, one never really knows anything for sure, does one?" Charlie echoed him. "Does one? I never found schooled people sure. I went to school only 3 years. People say that's bad, but it left me open to see things most people are too busy to look at. Like, I know books are trees. Some would call that simple, but I read more in trees than in the books that are made from them." The professor nodded reflectively. Charlie said, "Books ain't sure what's true. Books don't change. But life is change, building and falling like in a song." The professor admitted that after years of teaching, he'd begun to question his purpose. He'd found little inspiration and increasingly less fulfillment in his job, which was why he had come to the beach. "You did right, man," Charlie lauded. "Nature teaches. It's your nature. Life teaches. I love this world. My love makes me happy. I know this." The woman got up and straightened her clothes, rummaging their belongings to get her purse. With her back to us, she brushed out her hair. Patiently, the man shrugged and explained, "I promised to take her to town." As we walked back to our trailer, I was conflicted. Millions of people attend colleges, honing their minds to cut through serious problems, finding cures for diseases and inventions that amaze. Why would we be so gifted with wisdom and knowledge beyond schooling? Mary carried Charlie's wallet with all our money and IDs. On a blustery hilltop, Muffet jumped on her, and the wallet fell. There in the blasting wind, swirling notes, licenses, and dollar bills danced down the deep ravine. We headed south again, this time for new IDs. 3 nobodies indeed.